Hi everyone, thanks for being with me. This is day 11 of my 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So you've been one of those people that have been following the sequence of presentations that I've made. Thank you very much. I hope that you've gained something from them, as there is something for everybody in some of these discussions. So I am presenting over time some strategies that people can have, some ideas around dealing with anger, so that hopefully those of you watching can find ways to manage your emotions differently, understand them differently, and be able to operationalize your behavior so that your behavior is not harming those people that you say that you love the most. So, hope you're engaged with this process and that you watch my videos. Today, though, I'm going to talk about buttons and triggers. Now, most people will say that at some particular point, someone presses a button, and that button they respond to in a way that is often damaging. And the reason why buttons are important is because we blame people for pressing that button. And the question really needs to be asked is what is the button, who creates it, and why is it there? And the other question we need to ask too is what are triggers? So I thought a lot about this. This is many years ago now when I first wrote this program, and I thought about what is the difference between buttons and triggers, and I came up with my own definition. So these are not definitive definitions by any stretch of the imagination. This is simply my view as to what buttons and triggers are. Now, we all have buttons, I guess. We all have something that someone may press that sets us off in some form or another. And the question really needs to be asked is who's responsible for those buttons? How do I control those buttons? How do I understand what those buttons are? And then we need to think about what triggers us. A trigger's different from buttons, so that we can get our language a bit in keeping with anger and how anger manifests itself in our lives. So I'll take you to my definition, which is here. And so buttons and triggers. Buttons are created by personal experiences and are determined, and this is important, they are created by personal experiences and are determined by the degree to which these issues are still causing emotional pain. This is important to understand, that the issues which we refer to as buttons are emotional issues. Issues, as I've explained in one of my previous presentations, that sit with us all the time. And that sometimes, in fact a lot of the time, those issues that we feel are in our lives are not necessarily those of the person with whom we have an issue. The best example I can bring of this is that if someone says to us, "You remind me of your father," and that can that can evolve or present a button which may result in a unhelpful response. So when one looks at that, is the person saying to you, "Well, I want a response from you, and I'm going to attack you, and therefore I'm going to choose something that I know you're sensitive about because you are just like your father. You're behaving badly, you're yelling, you're screaming, you're shouting, you're denigrating me. This is what your father used to do." And you're saying, "Well, I don't want to be like my father. I don't like those things in my father. I appreciate how they damaged me, and I don't like them." But it is often an issue that just hasn't been dealt with. You haven't managed it yourself. You don't understand it fully yourself. So you're responding to that in a way which produces angry emotion and therefore bad behavior. So the question is, what do I need to do about that? So let's imagine for a moment that it's a button you've dealt with. So you've thought a lot about the way your father treated you. You now understand where those emotions come from. And therefore, as a result of all of that, you no longer have the emotional response that you would normally have to being told that you're just like your father. Now, if you're able to do that and someone says that to you, it would not generate the same emotional response. And as a result, you would probably not respond the way that you do. I used to, I don't know whether I talked about this in a previous post, but I used to respond badly when someone would just say the word you. My partner would say you, and I would automatically respond badly. And that came about because I started to think about what did you mean. And you would be a sense of, to me, it would be about being attacked. And so I thought, well, okay, what would happen then if I could suspend my response to the word you and listen to whatever followed the you? And when I did that, I discovered that I need not worry about the you so much because to me, the most important thing was what it was that I was being criticised for. And I had to deal with that notion of being criticised and where did that criticism came from. And it certainly came from other aspects of my life, not from what my partner was saying to me. So I had to manage that. And once I did that, that button around the you disappeared. It was no longer relevant to me because I found a different way of not only understanding it, but also managing it. So that's what buttons are. They are created by personal experiences and are determined by the degree to which these issues are still causing emotional pain. So I suggest you go back to that post I did around emotions because it's important to talk about that, to understand that as well. So what therefore are triggers? Now, triggers are created by environmental experiences of which the person had no control. And I'll cite the best example I can think of in relation to a trigger is whereby, let's say you're involved in an accident and it happens at a certain intersection that you often pass through. And the accident was pretty horrific, you were damaged, you were hospitalised, whatever. Every time, you're not responsible for that accident. It was somebody else's fault. You're not responsible for it. But it was a traumatic event. And every time you go through that intersection, you remember and you feel the emotions that were caused by that accident. Well, that's a trigger. And a lot of issues around post-traumatic stress disorder are actually caused by triggers. But they do bring about an emotional response, which often we take out on other people. But it's a trigger. It's something over which you have no control. It doesn't mean you don't need to do some work around that experience, but it's important to understand that that trigger is not about you in terms of causing the problem, but it's certainly about you in understanding where that trigger comes from, why it's there, and to manage the behaviour that sits around that. So there are two differences here. There's the buttons, which are created by personal experiences, and then there are the triggers, which are created by an environmental experience, such as going through that intersection and having an accident. So the point is that we need to better understand where these experiences and these triggers come from. And once we do that, we can actually remove the button. We can take it out of our experience. We can then, if we're responding to it in a less intense emotional way, then we can ensure that our behaviour is modified and that the people around us will have a different experience of us that is not about being aggressive. So if you enjoy anything that I say, please subscribe to my channel. Please ring the bell for further notifications. There's a number of these posts to come. I've got to get up to 16. Yep. So there'll be other things that we'll be talking about in the future as well that hopefully you will find interesting. In the meantime, take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.